They say your home should be your safe place, a refuge. But that night, when I walked through the front door at 6:17 p.m., 2 hours earlier than Lindsay expected, it didn't feel like home. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's life. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't lavender, which Lindsay always kept diffusing in the living room. It wasn't the faint citrus from the cleaning spray she used, either. It was cologne. Sharp, unfamiliar, and undeniably male. Not mine. Not anything I owned. It was the kind of scent you noticed in a crowded elevator or on someone who cared about being noticed. And it lingered, too fresh to be old, too strong to ignore. I paused in the entryway, listening. The house was quiet. Not peaceful, just still. Like the air was waiting for me to notice what was wrong. I set my keys on the side table gently, like too much noise might break whatever illusion was still intact. My footsteps felt too loud as I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it. A glass sat on the coffee table, half full of something dark. I hadn't had a drink in 2 weeks. Not since Lindsay said she didn't like the way I got quiet after a beer. But this wasn't mine. The rim of the glass had a faint mark on it. A smudge, lip-shaped, no lipstick. Next to it was a bottle of scotch I didn't buy. And draped over the back of the couch, casual like it belonged, was a jacket. A man's jacket. Gray wool, slightly worn. Not mine. Not my brother's. Not her dad's. I'd met the guy once, and he wouldn't be caught dead in anything less than leather. It was a stranger's jacket, left like a breadcrumb trail. My chest tightened. I didn't move it, didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring at it like it might do something to explain itself. Then I heard her voice. Jake! She came out of the hallway holding her phone, looking down at it as she walked. Her hair was slightly messy, tied up, then let down in a rush. She wore one of her loose shirts, the collar slightly stretched like someone had tugged it. Her cheeks were flushed, but not the way they got when she was embarrassed or angry. It was more like adrenaline. Her pupils were wide, too wide for someone casually scrolling her phone. When she saw me, her eyes flickered, just for a moment. Shock maybe, or calculation. Then came the mask. You're home early. Her voice was light, as if I'd merely surprised her during yoga or walked in while she was baking. She didn't look at the jacket, didn't glance at the glass. She just kept her eyes on me, carefully casual. I didn't answer right away. Couldn't. My brain was trying to catch up, to stitch together the evidence and make it mean anything but the obvious. I got out early, I said finally, my voice low. Greg's client bailed, so the meeting wrapped before 5. She nodded, tucking her phone into her pocket. Lucky timing. That was it. No smile. No hug. No, how was your day? She followed my gaze to the couch, and that's when the lie formed. Oh, my brother came by. Dropped off that bookshelf from the storage unit. I told you I ordered one for the guest room. Remember? He helped bring it in. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. She walked over and picked up the jacket, not hurriedly, but not casually either. Like she was trying to act casual and hoping it passed. She tossed it over her arm. I told him not to leave his stuff here, she muttered, almost to herself. He's always doing this. It was too smooth, too fast. Funny, I said quietly. I didn't know he wore cologne. She didn't miss a beat. Yeah, he's been trying to date again. Guess he's going all out. That was Lindsay's *LL. She never denied directly. She redirected, reframed, recolored the moment. She turned suspicion into overreaction, and her calmness into superiority. She walked toward the bedroom, then paused. Why are you looking at me like that? I hadn't realized I was. I tried to soften my face, but it felt frozen. No reason, I said. She tilted her head, then crossed her arms. Jake, she said, tone changing, sharpening. This again? You get weird if I don't text back fast enough, if I talk about my coworkers, if I smell like the outside world. I just wasn't expecting. You weren't expecting me to have a life? She cut in. To see my brother for 10 minutes and not file a report about it? I wasn't accusing. Yes, you were. she snapped. Then quieter, more controlled. You just never say it out loud. The worst part? I didn't even know what I wanted from her in that moment. A better lie? The truth? A breakdown? Instead, she gave me cold confidence, the kind that made me feel small for even asking. You always do this, she said, moving past me toward the kitchen. You start reading into things. A jacket, a glass, a smell. And then somehow it becomes my fault for not pre-clearing every minute of my day. I watched her fill a glass of water like we hadn't just stepped into some parallel version of our lives. She was quiet for a second before speaking again. Did you pay the water bill yet? I blinked. What? The bill? She repeated, turning around. It was due on Monday. I had to cover it. Again. I opened my mouth but couldn't find the right words. She barreled on. Everything here is on me lately, Jake. Rent, groceries, laundry, logistics. You just exist. You float in and out, complaining about work and forgetting the one or two things I ask. That's not fair, I muttered. Oh, but it's true. Her voice wasn't angry. It was something worse, disappointed, exhausted, like she'd been waiting to drop this speech for weeks and finally had her moment. She leaned against the counter, sipping her water. Not a trace of guilt, not even discomfort, just cool detachment. And I stood there. The scent of cologne still hung in the air. Not mine, not her brother's, not explainable. But I said nothing, because part of me still needed to believe this wasn't what it looked like. That I hadn't stepped into a moment I wasn't meant to see. That she wasn't slipping away, slowly and deliberately, already halfway gone. So I nodded like the fool I was. Like the man who couldn't afford to break the mirror because he still needed to see himself in it. And Lindsay? She just walked away. The next day, I sat in my car outside the grocery store, staring at a bag of oranges in the passenger seat, like they might answer the questions circling in my head. I'd walked in with a list and come out with just those because the list didn't matter anymore. Nothing did. Not the groceries. Not the errands. Not the daily routines we used to share. All I could think about was the cologne, the jacket, the glass, and Lindsay's voice in my head saying, it was just my brother. It should have ended there, right? A dumb misunderstanding. A forgotten visit. Something small. Something explainable. But it didn't feel small. It didn't feel explainable. Felt like something had shifted. Like I'd crossed an invisible line from certainty into suspicion. And now I couldn't find my way back. I sat there for maybe an hour, just watching people go in and out of the store. Strangers. Normal lives. No drama. No sick feeling in their gut that their marriage had a crack running right down the center. I hadn't said anything to Lindsay since that moment in the kitchen. She hadn't brought it up either. It was like we made a silent agreement to pretend everything was fine, as long as we both kept moving forward like nothing had changed. But I felt it in my chest, in my throat, in the way I kept waking up at 3 a.m. just to look over and make sure she was still in bed beside me. It wasn't just that night. It was everything that came before it. It all started coming back now, like puzzle pieces that had been ignored on purpose. First, her phone. Always with her now, never left on the table, not even when she was showering. She used to leave it charging in the kitchen every night. Now it slept under her pillow. The screen used to light up with messages, notifications I could see from across the room. But those stopped showing up weeks ago. She must have changed the settings. Then there were her new coworkers. She talked about them a lot suddenly. Not in a way that suggested friendships, just names, mostly male names. She'd say things like, Andrew's got this weird way of chewing his pen, or Chris says the numbers on this project are gonna tank. Always vague, always harmless, always delivered with a breezy smile like she had no idea she was laying down breadcrumbs. But I was following them now. I couldn't not follow them. I remembered the nights she came home with the scent of food I didn't recognize. Expensive meals. Spices and sauces we didn't have in our fridge. Restaurants I'd never been to. Once she said she stopped by a new Mexican spot with her team. I looked it up that night. It wasn't open past 6 p.m. She got home at 9:30. I never said anything. I'd wanted to, but what would I even say? Your food smells like lies? She was always tired. That became the default explanation. Tired from work. Tired from meetings. Tired from people. And yeah, maybe she was. But the kind of tired she carried didn't look like exhaustion. It looked like someone full. Someone satisfied. Someone holding a secret that fed her in ways I no longer could. She started closing her laptop when I walked into the room. Not slamming it, not obvious, just slow, deliberate. She'd say it was because she needed a break from screens. But even the way she tapped her phone changed. Less scrolling, more texting. Thumbs moving fast, pauses between messages, little half-smiles that she thought I didn't notice. Even the way she walked had changed. That was the thing I hated myself most for noticing. There was this new energy in her steps. Lighter, but not in the way someone walks when they're stress-free. It was the kind of walk someone has when they're being seen, watched, admired, like someone else was making her feel alive, and I wasn't even in the room. All of it stacked up inside me. All of it whispered one thing: someone else is here. Not just in our home, in our life, in her. And I was the last one to admit it. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother. Not Greg from work. Not even Tom, who'd been through his own mess of a divorce a year ago. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want their advice. I didn't want the look people gave you when they realize you've been played. I wasn't ready to be that guy. So I did the next best thing. I pretended. I came home like normal. I laughed when she made a joke. I asked how her day was. I didn't flinch when she said she had a late meeting or dinner plans. I even offered to cook. She always said no. And every night, I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember when things started to change. Not just in her, but in me. Maybe it started the day I stopped asking questions. The day I convinced myself that trusting someone meant ignoring the bad feelings. Maybe that's when I gave her the space to rewrite what us meant. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion. It wasn't the jealousy or the anger. It was the realization that I'd been willingly blind. That I let it happen because I didn't want to believe she could be the kind of person who... No, I couldn't even finish the thought. Instead, I focused on the small things. Tracking inconsistencies. Playing detective with no badge and no authority. I'd open her mail now. Not all of it, just the stuff that looked like personal cards or hand-addressed envelopes. Most were from friends or her mom. But one time, there was a hotel rewards flyer addressed to her. A hotel we hadn't stayed at in years. It was 3 cities over. She'd never mentioned going there. I looked at our shared calendar one night while she was in the shower. She used to log everything. Appointments, dinners, even brunches. But there were blank spots now. Whole weekends with nothing listed. When I asked where she'd been, she'd say, "Oh, just errands." Errands that lasted 5 hours. One night, I checked her car's odometer. The mileage didn't make sense. It was higher than it should have been. Not by much, just enough to notice. Enough to ask, where did she really go? I wanted to say something. I really did. But I'd seen how she shut me down the last time. The way she turned it on me. You're always looking for problems. So I stayed quiet. I kept collecting, mentally tagging each moment, each inconsistency, each tiny betrayal. I didn't know what I was going to do with all of it. I wasn't building a case to leave. Not yet. I wasn't sure I even had the courage to leave. I was still hoping, deep down, that I was wrong. That I'd wake up and find some rational explanation for everything. But I also knew that if this continued, if I let it keep festering, eventually, the truth would no longer be something I feared. It would be something I needed. And when that moment came, I'd have to stop pretending. It was a Thursday night when it finally cracked wide open. Lindsay had told me she was heading out of town for a business meeting. Just one night. Some big client dinner with upper management, she said. I'll stay at a hotel. Come back tomorrow evening. Her tone was casual. Too casual. Like she'd rehearsed it. No hesitation. No guilt. Just a clean, tight delivery like a weather forecast. I played along. Need me to drive you to the station? I asked. She waved me off. No, I'll Uber. It's easier. I nodded. I smiled. I kissed her goodbye like it was normal, like we were still us. But as soon as the door closed behind her, I sat in the silence and stared at the floor for a long time. And then, I opened her laptop. It wasn't locked. She never thought she needed to. And maybe that was arrogance, or maybe she thought I'd never look. Either way, the screen lit up and I started digging. Emails, calendar invites, travel apps. It didn't take long. There was no client dinner. No hotel booking in the city she claimed she'd be in. But there was one pinned destination on her map's history. A lake cabin 2 hours outside of town. One we used to rent for anniversaries, birthdays, the occasional spontaneous getaway back when we were trying. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I stood up. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I would do when I got there. But I knew I had to see it. Not just suspect it. Not guess, not wonder. See, the drive felt longer than it ever had before. Every tree, every bend in the road felt like a delay. My hands gripped the wheel like it might break free from the road if I let go. And the closer I got, the more the silence in the car wrapped around me, pressing in on my ears like a scream held in too long. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot, the sun was gone. The sky had turned a deep, navy blue, and the cabin glowed with soft golden light. It looked warm, inviting, familiar, like a lie dressed up in nostalgia. I parked down the hill where the trees could hide my car. My boots crunched softly on the leaves as I walked up, careful, cautious. There were no voices, just the quiet hum of conversation through old wooden walls. The blinds weren't fully closed, just enough of a gap for me to see through. There she was, Lindsay, wearing my old college sweatshirt, the one she used to steal on cold mornings and claim as her own. Her hair was tied back loosely, and she was barefoot, walking around the tiny kitchen with a wine glass in her hand. Her smile was real, not the polite one she gave me, not the forced one she wore during tense breakfasts. This one reached her eyes. And then I saw him. He stepped into view behind her. Taller than me, dark hair, relaxed posture, the kind of easy confidence I hadn't felt in years. He reached out and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. She laughed, soft and breathless, and leaned into him like they'd done this 100 times before. On the table beside them was a candlelit dinner. 2 plates, 1 bottle of wine, the same wine we'd opened on our wedding night. From the box set we said we'd save for milestones. There were only 3 bottles in that box. 1 we drank, 1 we lost during a move. This was the last one. I didn't move. I didn't knock. I didn't break in or scream or throw a rock through the window. I just stood there, staring through the slit in the blinds like a ghost who used to live there. It wasn't just what I saw. It was how she was. Lindsay wasn't hiding. She wasn't acting like someone who feared getting caught. She wasn't looking over her shoulder or jumping at sounds. She was just there in that moment, fully and unapologetically, like she had already erased me from her story. That's when I understood. She didn't think she was cheating. She thought she had moved on. In her mind, I was already gone. Placeholder. A mistake that she hadn't figured out how to exit gracefully. I was a ghost still haunting the space she hadn't cleaned out yet. And maybe, in a way, I let her believe that. I don't remember how long I stood there. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 30. Time bent in strange ways when your life turned into a movie you never wanted to watch. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the car. The cold hit harder now. The night felt heavier. But inside I felt clear. Not calm. Not okay. But clear. Like a fog had finally lifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel rage. I just felt done. I drove home without music. No distractions. Just the sound of tires humming against pavement and my own thoughts trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no sense to be made. It had happened. That was enough. When I got home, the house felt hollow. Not quiet, hollow. Like the walls themselves knew what had changed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room in the dark, hands clasped, watching the door like I was waiting for something. But I wasn't. I was just letting the silence settle into me. She came home the next morning around 10. I heard the key in the lock, the creak of the door. Her footsteps were soft, like she was trying not to wake me. I stayed still. She walked into the kitchen, then paused. And then I heard it, the shuffle of papers, the breath catching in her throat, the low, controlled sigh that came right before she said my name. Jake! I stood. There on the kitchen table were the divorce papers, blank and signed but real. Her face didn't crumple. She didn't panic. She didn't collapse into apologies. She just looked tired, like someone who'd stayed up too late playing out the consequences of her choices and decided she was ready to face them now. "I'm sorry," she said, but her voice lacked the emotion to make it mean anything. "I didn't think you'd find out like that." I didn't respond. I just waited. "I'm not going to fight you," she said. Pulling out a chair and sitting down like this was just another item on her to-do list. "I'll sign whatever you need. I've already drafted a split for the assets." She slid a folder toward me. Inside was everything. The house, the joint account, the furniture, even the car we shared. "It's fair," she added. My eyes drifted to a small sticky note on the folder. Just one line written in her handwriting. "He will be part of our life." I read it again and again. That was it. That was all she had to say about the man from the cabin. Not sorry. Not "it just happened." Not "he means nothing." He will be part of our life. She wasn't asking. She was telling me. She'd already made room for him. So I picked up a pen and signed every page without speaking. When I was done, I stood and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. And still no tears came. Just that same heavy silence, the kind that settles after a bomb goes off. The kind of silence that doesn't need to say anything because the damage already spoke for itself. I didn't know what the next day would look like. I didn't know who I was anymore. But I knew one thing with certainty. I wasn't her husband anymore. And I wasn't going to pretend I was ever again. The morning after I signed the divorce papers, I stood in the kitchen holding a coffee mug I didn't recognize. It was plain white, chipped near the rim. Definitely not part of our set. I turned it over in my hands, wondering if it belonged to him. If she'd already started bringing his things into the house, even while I still slept under the same roof. The thought made my stomach turn. Lindsay came downstairs around 8 a.m., dressed like she was heading to a casual meeting. Hair tied back, blazer, that distant look in her eyes that I now knew wasn't exhaustion. It was detachment. She was already halfway out the door emotionally, and I was just the guy who hadn't moved his boxes yet. She didn't say good morning. She didn't comment on the coffee. She just slid her phone into her bag, glanced at the table where the signed documents sat neatly stacked, and gave the faintest nod. "Thank you," she said, like I'd handed her a report she'd asked for. Like this final unmaking of what we built was just paperwork. I didn't respond. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm, and paused like she wanted to say something else. But whatever it was, she swallowed it. Just gave me that tired, almost polite smile and walked out the front door. The house was silent again, but this time it felt final. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel much of anything. Just a dull echo inside me. Like someone had scraped out everything I was and left the shell standing. For hours I didn't move. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at nothing. My thumb hovered over my brother's name, then Tom's, then back again. I thought about calling someone, just to hear a voice that wasn't hers. But I didn't. I couldn't yet face the questions, the sympathy, the awkward silences that came after, "I'm so sorry, man." So I just sat. When evening came, I found myself walking the hallway of our house like a stranger. Every room was still filled with her. Her throw pillows, her books, her slippers by the bathroom door. All the little things I'd stopped noticing, now louder than ever. It felt like living inside a memory I hadn't agreed to keep. The worst part? She hadn't even tried to hide it. There were no denials, no begging, no fight, just a clean exit plan, a calm explanation, and a signature. I guess I should have been grateful. A lot of people get dragged through hell during divorce, lawyers, screaming matches, custody wars. But what she did was something else entirely. A colder kind of betrayal. The kind that doesn't come with yelling or slamming doors. Just a slow fade out, like I'd been muted from her life months ago. And that sticky note, he will be part of our life. I don't know why that sentence kept echoing in my head. Maybe because she didn't say my life. She said our, as if I would still somehow be involved. As if I'd sit across from him one day at a future birthday dinner, sipping wine and pretending we all belonged at the same table. That wasn't happening. Not in this lifetime. Later that night, I walked into our bedroom, the one we once spent Sunday mornings in, laughing under tangled sheets, talking about stupid dreams and coffee orders and maybe having kids one day. Now it felt like a hotel room. Impersonal. Used. I opened her closet. Half empty. She'd already started packing. Not just clothes. Books. Jewelry. The Polaroids from our road trip down Highway 1. The box of postcards from when she studied abroad. All gone. She was efficient. Calculated. She hadn't left anything sentimental behind, like a woman unsure of her choice. She'd only left what she didn't care to keep, me included. I stood there for a long time, staring at the hangers swaying slightly from where she'd rushed. Then I grabbed a suitcase and began packing the rest of her things. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I couldn't breathe with her scent in the pillows. Couldn't walk through the living room and see the blanket she used every night, or the half-burned candle she lit when she wanted mood lighting. I needed her gone. Completely. I packed everything carefully. Folded, sealed, labeled. I didn't throw anything. Didn't break a single item. That would have implied I still cared enough to feel something. When I finished, I left the suitcase in the hallway. A small post-it note stuck to the top. Ready when you are. 2 days later, she came by to pick it up. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't linger on the porch. She just lifted it into her car and gave a quick, efficient wave. And that was it. That was the last time I saw her. In the weeks that followed, the house became a tomb. Not haunted, just hollow. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. Couldn't do it. I started crashing on the couch, waking up to the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the creak of old floorboards. I stopped playing music, stopped turning on the TV. The silence felt honest. People started noticing I wasn't okay. Greg cornered me at work and asked if I'd been sick. Tom invited me out 3 times before I finally said yes, and then bailed last minute. My mom texted me with a heart emoji and a vague, "Thinking of you." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to say the words. She left. She replaced me. She didn't fight for us at all. Eventually, I emailed my boss and asked to go remote for a while. Said I needed space to focus. He granted it without question. I think he could hear the hollow in my voice, too. Every now and then, I'd get the urge to look her up. Her Instagram was still public. And there he was, him, the guy from the cabin. The one with the easy grin and expensive shoes. In one photo, he stood beside her at a charity gala, holding her hand. She wore a red dress I'd never seen. Caption, "New chapter. New chapter." I closed the app and deleted it. Then came the paperwork. The official court date. The division of assets. Her lawyer sent over her demands. Half the savings, some furniture, a small monthly stipend. Nothing wild. Nothing cruel. It was like everything else she did, polished. Clinical. I gave it to my friend Tom. He'd worked with a lawyer during his own divorce, said she was sharp, aggressive when necessary. She reviewed the documents and asked one question. "Do you want to fight this? Or do you want to move on?" I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I said, "I don't want her to get away with rewriting the story." Tom's lawyer smiled. "Then let's make sure she doesn't." We started digging. I pulled bank records, phone logs, copies of the cabin rental, every receipt she left behind. And there it was, payment confirmations, location pings, email headers. But the clincher came from Tom himself. "I've got an old Nest Cam still active from when I used to dog sit for you guys," he said one afternoon. "Forgot to disable it. Still linked to my cloud." He pulled up footage from the week before the cabin trip. Lindsay, entering the house with him. Not her brother. Not a friend. Him. They kissed in the hallway, right under the photos of our wedding. That was the moment I stopped feeling numb. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was defending myself from being erased. I forwarded the footage to my lawyer. She watched it in silence and then simply said, "She forfeits her right to spousal support, and possibly her share of the house." It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. I moved out before the paperwork was finalized. Not because I had to. Technically, the house still belonged to both of us, but because I couldn't stand another day inside those walls. Every corner, every shadow, every coffee ring on the table felt like it carried her name. The place smelled like betrayal, like perfume and pine-scented cleaner and memories I didn't ask to keep. So I packed what was mine. Not what was expensive. Not what was fair. Just the things that still felt like me. A few clothes. My laptop. A box of books. An old hoodie from college that somehow still held the shape of better days. I left everything else behind. And I didn't tell her I was leaving. She could come home to the silence. The new place was nothing special. A one-bedroom on the edge of town, where the streets grew quiet after 8 p.m., and the air always smelled faintly of damp concrete. The paint peeled in the corners. The heater clicked like it was arguing with itself. The fridge hummed all night long like it needed company. But it was mine. Nobody else's toothbrush in the holder. Nobody else's voice in the next room lying with a straight face. It was the first place in months where I didn't have to pretend. The days blurred. I tried working, remote assignments, quick turnarounds, anything to fill the time, but focus was a stranger now. I'd sit down to write up a report or scan a spreadsheet and suddenly find myself staring out the window, thinking about the lake. About the look on her face when she leaned into that man like I'd never existed. Sometimes I'd go hours without realizing I hadn't spoken a single word all day. The silence wasn't just outside. It was inside me, too. I stopped answering texts. Most people stopped reaching out after a while. The only person who checked in regularly was Tom, and even he didn't push. He'd just send one-word messages like, "Alive?" or "Breathe." I appreciated it more than I let on. Nights were worse. The apartment got cold, colder than it should have, even with the heater working overtime. I'd bundle up, socks and a hoodie, blanket wrapped around me like armor. But the cold found a way in anyway. It wasn't just in my skin, it was in my chest. My bones. The space behind my eyes where I kept replaying things I wished I could forget. I didn't sleep. Not really. Just lay still with the lights off, listening to the fridge buzz and the wind tap at the windows. Some nights I'd think about messaging her. Not to yell. Not to ask for anything. Just to say I'm still here. But I never did. Because I knew I was talking to someone who had already stopped listening long before she left. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos. I wasn't looking for pain, I was just looking. Some part of me wanted to understand, to trace the trail backward, to find the moment where it started to fall apart. Our wedding, our honeymoon, her birthday party where I made a cake from scratch and it collapsed in the middle. She laughed for 10 minutes straight and said it was the best gift she ever got. There was a picture of us on the balcony, wine in hand, lights from the city behind us, smiling like nothing could ever touch us. And then the photos started to change. She stopped looking at the camera, started standing further away. Her eyes didn't smile anymore, even when her lips did. I hadn't noticed before, but now it was obvious. She was already leaving, frame by frame. One afternoon, I went back to the old house. Not for her. She wasn't there. It was for the court inspection, one of those required walkthroughs before we signed the final agreement. I met my lawyer there. Lindsay's wasn't present. She didn't show either. The house looked smaller somehow. Not in square footage, but in presence. Like whatever spirit it had once held had been *ked out of it and thrown into the cold. Some of her things were gone. Big furniture pieces, artwork, the glass vases she always kept by the window. But the smell was still there. That soft floral scent she wore on her neck. The one I used to think of as home. I stood in the doorway to our bedroom and felt nothing. Not grief. Not longing. Just a strange awareness that I didn't belong there anymore. like I'd stumbled into someone else's memory. The final court date came 3 weeks later. I wore a suit I hadn't put on since our last anniversary dinner. It still fit, but something about it felt looser, like it wasn't made for the man I was now. Lindsay arrived with her lawyer 10 minutes before the hearing. She looked flawless, hair curled, navy blue dress that framed her figure in a way I couldn't ignore. She smiled at the court clerk like they were old friends, waved politely at my lawyer, didn't look at me. It was a performance. Her calm, her posture, her tone. When the judge asked her to speak, she painted herself as rational, centered, emotionally exhausted but hopeful. She said things like, "We grew apart, and we want different things now." She never said the word affair. Not once. When it was my turn, I said very little. Just confirmed the facts, the timeline, the property division. Then my lawyer handed over the footage, Tom's video. The time-stamped frame of Lindsay walking into the house with the man she swore hadn't entered our lives. The man she later said would be part of our life. The judge watched in silence, then turned to Lindsay. Her composure cracked, just for a second. Her fingers curled into fists on her lap. Her eyes didn't widen, they narrowed, like someone caught in a lie and trying to recalculate the math fast enough to survive the next sentence. The judge didn't raise his voice, didn't scold. He just ruled. She would not receive spousal support. The house would go to me. The legal fees were hers. It was clean, clinical, unemotional. But I saw her jaw tighten. I saw the corners of her mouth twitch like she wanted to scream but couldn't afford to. She glanced at me then, for the first time. And it wasn't anger or sadness I saw in her eyes. It was fear. Not fear of me, but fear that the story she'd rewritten wasn't going to hold up outside the courtroom. I left without speaking to her. Didn't wait for the paperwork. Didn't glance back. It was over. Not just the marriage. The narrative. She didn't get to be the victim. Not anymore. And I didn't need to be the broken man. A week later, I started therapy. Not because I felt weak, but because I wanted to feel something honest again. The therapist's office smelled like cedar and mint tea. There were plants on every windowsill. A dog wandered between chairs, sniffing at strangers and then flopping at their feet like a silent witness. Her name was Amber. The therapist, not the dog. She was calm, younger than I expected. Wore jeans and a cardigan like she had nothing to prove. "Tell me your story," she said. So I did. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But piece by piece, like rocks in my chest I could finally set down. She didn't flinch. Didn't interrupt. Just listened. When I finished, she asked one question. "And what do you want now?" I didn't have an answer yet. But the silence that followed didn't feel empty this time. Felt like space. On the way out, the receptionist smiled at me. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. It wasn't until I saw her name tag, Amber, RN, that I remembered. She'd been the nurse during a visit I made months ago, after I had a stress-induced panic attack in the middle of the night and thought I was dying. She was the one who held my arm steady while they checked my vitals. She'd said, "You're not dying. You're just carrying too much alone." I never forgot that. She recognized me now. Smiled. "Better?" she asked, nodding toward the therapist's office. I nodded. "Getting there." She handed me a card with the next appointment. "Good," she said. "We need fewer ghosts around here." I walked out into the cold, and for the first time in a long time it didn't sink into my bones. Lindsay stood tall in court, polished and rehearsed, until the judge played footage of her affair. Her face faltered. No alimony, no house, no more control. A week later, I saw Amber, the nurse who once calmed me during a panic attack. I returned to the hospital, this time with flowers, not fear. She smiled. No pity, just understanding. As we stepped into the autumn air, I realized the weight was gone. My life was mine again.